It was a March morning in the late summer of 1983 in a small, peaceful town in southern Brazil. But inside house number 27, the world was holding its breath. Otavio, a 36-year-old farmer with serene blue eyes, stood in a hospital waiting room, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles were white. For 12 years, he and his wife, Helena, had prayed for a child. After 2 miscarriages and a doctor's sterile, final verdict that she could never carry a pregnancy to term, they had all but given up hope. Then, the impossible happened. Helena became pregnant. NNTHE, initial joy, was quickly replaced by a cascade of miracles that left the doctors speechless. At 4 months, they discovered it was twins. At 5 months, it was 5 babies. And at 6 months, in a specialized hospital in the capital, the final, definitive shock, Helena was carrying 9 healthy baby girls. The doctors called it a miracle. Helena, her face glowing, called it a reward for all the years of pain. NNTHE birth was a war operation. The entire hospital was mobilized. And on March 12th, in a matter of minutes, 9 small, fragile, blonde-haired, blue-eyed girls came into the world. The operating room wept. Otavio, watching through the glass, couldn't speak. He just stared at the 9 tiny incubators, repeating the words in his head like a prayer. This is my family. They're all my daughters. NNBUT. While he was discovering the miracle of fatherhood, fate was preparing its final cruel blow. Towards the end of the surgery, Helena began to hemorrhage. The doctors fought for 2 hours, but they couldn't save her. Otavio was holding his 9th daughter's tiny hand when his brother found him. He didn't need words. He felt the world go silent around him. He fell to his knees in the hospital hallway, a widower with 9 newborn daughters, the weight of an impossible promise settling onto his shoulders. NNTHE news spread like wildfire. Donations poured in from all over the country, bottles, clothes, diapers. But Otavio didn't want fame. He wanted structure. He renovated their small house, built a nursery with 9 small cribs, and hung a photo of Helena on the wall, framed with the dried flowers she loved. 2 months later, he brought his daughters home. The entire town gathered to welcome them, a parade of hope and sorrow. And there he was, alone in the back of a truck with 9 babies in his arms. The real challenge had just begun. NNHE was no longer Otavio the farmer. He was the father of the 9 girls. He spent his nights in a blur of diapers and bottles, creating a military-like system to survive. He named them Anna, Laura, Sophia, Clara, Elisa, Julia, Helena, Luisa, and Bianca. And every night, he would tell them stories of the mother they would never know. When the girls turned 1, the state tried to intervene, claiming he was unfit to raise them alone. They spoke of foster care, of separating the sisters. Otavio fought back with the fury of a man who had nothing left to lose. "They are my daughters," he told the judge. "I made a promise to their mother. No one will separate them." NNHE won. And from that day forward, he decided to build their future with his own 2 hands. He sold the small plot of land behind their house and bought a greenhouse. Helena had loved flowers, so he began to grow them, rare, beautiful blooms that felt like a tribute to her. He started a small business, Helena's Flowers, creating personalized arrangements for each daughter, Anna's roses, Sophia's orchids, Julia's tulips. It was a way to sustain the family with a dignity she would have been proud of. And within 2 years, the business was a success. He bought an old school bus, renovated the inside, and began traveling on Sundays with the girls to local fairs, selling bouquets and discreetly telling their story, not to show off, but to inspire. And they did. Not as the girls grew, he was their everything. He combed their hair, sewed their dresses, taught them to read, baked their birthday cakes, and mended their socks. When they were sick, he stayed up all night with a cool cloth on their foreheads. When they cried from nightmares, he told them stories of a brave mother watching over them from the stars. He was their hero, and he carried that role with the strength of 1,000 men. NNBUT, it wasn't always easy. There were moments of utter exhaustion, of a loneliness so profound it felt like a physical weight. Moments when he would cry in the quiet of the bathroom, terrified of failing, of not being enough, but he never let them see it. And adolescence arrived like a storm, each of the 9 girls fighting for her own identity. Laura wanted to cut her hair short. Bianca wanted to stop wearing dresses. Sophia started drawing sadder pictures. He didn't fight. He listened. He talked to each of them separately, understanding that love now required less action and more silence, less command and more presence. It was around this time that the town's whispers grew louder. How does he manage alone? Has any of them gotten pregnant yet? The words hurt, but what hurt more was the way his daughters looked at him, their eyes filled with a fierce, helpless desire to defend him. One day, Anna came home from school crying after a cruel classmate said her mother had chosen to die rather than raise 9 girls. Otavio hugged her tight. "Daughter," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "your mother gave her life for you. That is the greatest love there is." NTHAT. Same day, he called them all into the living room, and for the first time showed them a small wooden box. Inside was a ribbon from Helena's hair, a dried flower, and the letter he had written in the hospital. As they read his words, written in the depths of his grief, they all wept. In that moment, they understood. When the girls were 16, he did something that surprised everyone. He sold the greenhouse, bought an old school bus, and transformed it into a home on wheels. For 3 months, they traveled the country, a final, collective memory before their paths diverged. On their last night, sitting around a campfire under a sky full of stars, he told them, "I know I wasn't perfect, but if I could go back, I would do it all over again. You are my life." When they returned from their trip, something had changed. The farewell was near. At 18, each of the 9 girls began to follow their own path, their wings strong enough to carry them from the nest Otavio had so painstakingly built. Anna, the serious protector, went to Sao Paulo to study medicine. Laura, the extroverted speaker, chose journalism in Florianopolis. Julia, stubborn and courageous, enlisted in the army. Elisa went on an exchange program to see the world her father had shown them on a map. Sophia, who most resembled her mother, became a visual artist. Clara started a video channel telling moving stories. Helena, named for her mother, wanted to study psychology. Luisa became a missionary, and Bianca, the 9th, stayed. She wanted to stay with her father. Otavio watched the house slowly empty. Cribs had turned into beds, then empty closets, then locked rooms full of memories. The constant, chaotic symphony of 9 girls was replaced by a quiet that was heavy with their absence. But he was at peace. He knew he had accomplished his mission. He had raised 9 girls with love, with dignity, with truth. He had kept his promise to Helena. But fate, as always, still had one last surprise in store. Years passed. The house was quiet, but never truly empty. The daughters returned for holidays, their visits a whirlwind of laughter and stories. They brought friends, then fiancés, then husbands. The family expanded, its roots growing deeper. Otavio grew older, the lines on his face deepening not from sorrow, but from a life well lived. It was Bianca's 30th birthday when the final secret of house number 27 was revealed. She appeared in the kitchen one night, an official-looking envelope in her hand, her face pale. Her sisters whispered in the hallway. Otavio, sitting at the table with his coffee, felt a familiar, cold premonition. "You open it, daughter," he said, when she handed him the envelope. NSHE did. It was a DNA test, a test Bianca had taken on her own, driven by a doubt that had silently gnawed at her for years. Why didn't she look exactly like her other sisters? The blonde hair, the blue eyes, they were there. But something was different. NNTHE results were there in black and white. She was not Otavio's biological daughter. NNTHE confession came as a bombshell. Otavio, his face etched with a pain he had buried for 30 years, finally told the truth. On the night his wife died, one of the 9 girls had been stillborn. The hospital, unsure how to break the double tragedy to an already devastated man, had made a decision. They had switched the baby with an abandoned newborn who had been anonymously dropped off just hours earlier. "Am I that baby?" Bianca whispered, tears streaming down her face. Otavio reached for her, his own eyes full of tears. "You are my daughter, Bianca," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Because I held you in my arms with the same love, because I rocked you with the same music, and because, even though I didn't give you life, I chose you every single day. That is what being a father is." NNSHE cried. They all cried. But in the end, one by one, the sisters approached, hugged Bianca, and repeated in chorus, "You are our sister. You have always been our sister." That crisis brought the family closer together than any Christmas or birthday. The wound, finally exposed, healed with the truth. Life never stopped testing Otavio. Months after the truth about Bianca was revealed, he had a heart attack. He was alone at home, his daughters now scattered across the country, building their own lives. It was his neighbor who found him and called for help. He survived, but he left the hospital weaker, the shadow of his own mortality, now a constant companion. NNHI's daughters, consumed with guilt and fear, began taking turns caring for him. But he didn't want to be a burden. He had raised them to be strong, to fly, and he refused to be the reason their wings were clipped. One day, he gathered them all in the living room and made a request. "Let me live with one of you," he said, his voice quiet. "I don't want to be alone anymore, but I also don't want to get in anyone's way. Decide amongst yourselves what is best." They argued. They fought. But in the end, they decided something no one expected. They would sell their childhood home, the house of memories, and buy a new, larger house where they could all live together for a while, a return to their roots, each bringing their own story back to the fold. It was in this new home that the next upheaval occurred. While rummaging through a box of their father's old things, they found a letter he'd never sent, dated 1982, addressed to a woman named Beatrice. "N? Who is this woman, father?" NHE fell silent, and then he revealed a secret he had carried for over 40 years. Before he met Helena, he had been in love with a young woman named Beatrice. She had become pregnant, but then she disappeared. He never heard from her again. "And I might have a son out there," he whispered, "that I've never met." An NTHE impact was enormous. The sisters looked at each other in shock. Could it be possible that there was another? It was then that the daughters made an unexpected decision. They would look for Beatrice. They would go to the ends of the earth, if necessary. And this search would change everything the family thought they knew about themselves. Silence fell over the house as Sophia stood up, an old, yellowed letter in her hands. The other sisters froze. Otavio looked up from the table, his expression clouded with a confusion that was soon to be replaced by a pain he had not felt in 41 years. "I discovered this letter almost 2 years ago," Sophia began, her voice calm but trembling. "It was inside a box of Mom's memories, hidden in the back of the closet. I read it, and I put it back. But now I can't hide it from you anymore." NSHE handed the letter to her father. His hands shook as he took it. As he read, his expression shifted from confusion to disbelief, and finally, to a wave of silent, gut-wrenching tears. His wife's words, written weeks before the birth, were a farewell. She knew. She had predicted she wouldn't leave the hospital alive, that the doctors had warned her of the immense risks. NBUT. It was the final paragraph that shattered them all. "If anything happens to me," Helena had written, her elegant script a ghost from the past, "know that it was my choice. I knew the risks. But I chose our daughters, I chose each of them. Even without knowing them, I chose to give them a chance to live, even if it cost me my own." Otavio broke down, clutching the letter to his chest. One by one, his 9 daughters knelt around him, their own tears falling freely. In that moment, they weren't 30 or 40. They were just daughters, faced with the profound, devastating truth of their mother's sacrifice. "Anne, I never knew," he whispered. "I thought it was a medical error, but she knew. She chose you. She was a hero." "Anna," the doctor said, her voice thick with emotion. Sophia got up and opened a box she had brought from her room. Inside were 9 small hand-sewn dresses, one for each daughter. "I found these too," she said. She knew she wouldn't see us wear them, but she sewed them anyway. NNTHAT night. They didn't sleep. They sat around their father, spreading out the old photos, singing the songs their mother had loved, telling the stories he had shared. They were finally complete, not because the pain was gone, but because now it made sense. The news of the 9 pregnancies spread like wildfire through the city. It was as if fate, after decades of silence, had decided to answer all at once. The sisters, in turn, were united as never before. The experience of collective pregnancy, of bringing children into the world alongside the women with whom they had shared everything, brought a new, almost sacred complicity. Otavio, now nearly 70, watched it all with shining eyes. He observed the large belly of one, the morning sickness of another, the quiet sparkle in their eyes. It was as if each of them carried not just a child, but an answer to life, a response to the suffering and the silence he had endured alone for so many years. "They're fine. They made it this far," he'd say to himself as he watered the plants in the backyard, listening to the laughter coming from the kitchen. And that's when the most symbolic moment came. The 9 daughters decided to organize a special Sunday lunch, just like in the old days. The house filled with laughter, aromas, and life. As they gathered around the table, a silence fell. Anna, the second oldest, stood up, a glass of juice in her hand. "And, Dad," she began, her voice trembling, "we thought long and hard before telling you this. As teenagers, we were embarrassed to thank you. We thought it was normal for a father to become a mother, cook, caregiver, and protector all at the same time. But now, we know it was a miracle." She took a deep breath. "That's why all our children, without exception, will be named after Mom. All of them." As a way of thanking her, and you, NNTHE old man, didn't say a word. He just wept, the tears falling heavily as his 9 daughters approached to embrace him, an embrace of so many memories, so many silences healed, so much pain now reconverted into love. NNTHE following week, the births began. One after another, a rotation of aunts, godmothers, and sisters caring for one another. And in the end, 9 grandchildren were born, 6 girls, 3 boys, all with the name Helena as part of their registry. A tribute to the woman who gave birth to 9 lives and left without knowing any of them. Otavio's house was noisy again, filled with the beautiful chaos of new life. But in the midst of this happiness, one final secret remained. One afternoon, while cleaning out the attic, Anna found an old, locked box. Inside, among photos and letters, was a sealed envelope. It was a letter from her mother, Helena, addressed to Otavio. In the yellowed pages, Helena told a story never revealed. Before discovering she was pregnant, she had lost a baby boy in an early miscarriage. But what shocked the family was what came next. Helena revealed that at the same time, she'd had to make an impossible decision: to donate part of her organs to save the life of a close relative who was in a coma. She didn't say who, only that she hoped one day the truth would come out. The family, moved by a truth they never knew, decided they had to seek answers. Who was this woman their mother had saved? What was her story? And so, guided by the few clues in the old letter, their search began. It led them to a small, quiet town in the countryside, a place of forgotten histories. It was there they discovered the connection, a piece of their family puzzle they never knew was missing. The woman who had received Helena's transplant was Otavio's distant aunt, a woman who had been estranged from the family for years and who they all believed had passed away. This discovery brought the family even closer, a beautiful, unexpected reunion that showed them Helena's love hadn't just saved their own lives. It had healed a wound in the family they never knew existed. Her legacy was greater, wider, and more profound than they could have ever imagined. As Otavio held his newborn grandchildren in his arms, his heart was full. He felt Helena's presence in the laughter of his daughters, in the faces of the new generation, in the love that had not only survived but multiplied. His mission, the one he had accepted in a cold hospital hallway so many years ago, was finally complete. Years later, when the grandchildren were old enough to understand, he would sit them down and tell them the whole story. The story of their grandmother, Helena, the woman who chose them over herself. And the story of their grandfather, Otavio, the man who had spent his entire life keeping his promise. He would tell them that family isn't just about blood. It's about the choices we make, the sacrifices we endure, and the love we refuse to let go of, no matter what. And so the family was whole in a way they had never been before, their foundations shaken and then rebuilt with the mortar of truth. The 9 sisters, now mothers themselves, created a new kind of legacy. They established a foundation in Helena's name, a charity that provided support for families who had lost a parent, a quiet tribute to the man who had taught them everything about love and the woman who had given them everything with her sacrifice. Otavio, his hair now completely white, spent his final years surrounded by the beautiful, chaotic symphony of his daughters and his 9 grandchildren. He was no longer just the father of the 9 girls. He was Grandpa Otavio, the man with the sad, kind eyes who told the best stories, the one who taught them that family wasn't just about blood, but about the choices we make, the sacrifices we endure, and the love we refuse to let go of, no matter what. When he finally passed away at the age of 77, the entire town came to his funeral. His 9 daughters stood together, 9 pillars of strength, their children beside them. They didn't mourn a man who was gone. They celebrated a life that had been so fully, so beautifully, and so selflessly lived. On his gravestone, they didn't list his accomplishments or his wealth. They chose a single, simple line, the one he had written in a letter so many years ago, the promise he had kept until his very last breath: "You are the best I have left."